Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the CHGO Fire podcast. This emergency podcast is brought to you by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ALLCITY. That's Indeed.com/ALLCITY. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Happy to have fellow Alex C, friend of the show, Alex Calabrese, calling in to join us for the big news today. Of course, that is that Gregg Berhalter has been announced as the Fire's new director of football and the team's new head coach. Alex, how are you? Thanks for being here. How you feeling with this news finally being official?
No, I mean, I'm great. Thanks for having me on the show, as always. I think this is an incredible hire for the Chicago Fire, a bombshell that we kind of saw coming for maybe a couple of months, but still a huge hire for the Fire, enormous, and I think that's going to change a lot of things from top to bottom in this organization.
It's very funny that this simply went from like, as soon as he was fired by the USMNT, this went from being this would be an obvious thing for the Fire to do. He lives here already. He has MLS experience. This checks boxes, to then the smoke and now the fire, pardon the pun, that we've seen develop over the last several months. We already got a lot of comments in the chat. We will get to some of those as we go today because I know lots of people have thoughts on how this has panned out. I want to just quickly recap how Gregg Berhalter got here. He started his coaching as an assistant at the LA Galaxy when he retired as a player. It was his last club. He was then the head coach of Hammarby in the Swedish top flight for 2 seasons before returning to the U.S. with Columbus Crew. Spent 5 years there before taking over the U.S. men's national team in 2018. And he was in that post until this past summer with, of course, that brief, strange 6 months where he technically was not the USMNT manager. Notable, I guess, Alex, that he also served this dual role of being, in charge of the front office and being the coach when he was in Columbus. We'll get into that more in a second. But, on the one hand, people say, oh, what did he achieve with Columbus? And on the other hand, he made the playoffs 4 out of 5 years, which, again, the bar isn't very high for the Fire. The bar here for improvement is low. But how do you view Berhalter's previous MLS experience? Because I personally think it was solid. It was fine. But I think I regard him higher as a coach now than I did then.
No, I mean, I think he definitely improved as a coach over the course of his USMNT tenure. It's really easy to remember what happened last, what happened in the Copa America, what happened in those last couple months, which were a disaster for Gregg Berhalter. But for his first tenure from 2018 to 2022, he was pretty good. He did improve the team significantly. It was a successful stint. He set out some goals and he accomplished them. So I think in terms of his head coaching abilities, he's a better coach than he was in Columbus. And I think he made a good reputation for himself. And then in those last couple of months here with the Copa America, with some of those friendlies that didn't go so well, it kind of mitigated that a little bit. But I do think he has improved as a coach since he was in Columbus. The only thing we haven't seen in a while is him as a director of football, as a sporting director, as someone making those decisions on the transfer market in bringing in players. We haven't seen him building a roster in that way since he was in Columbus. At the same time, recruitment, one of the feathers in his cap at the U.S. men's national team, Yunus Musa, Serginho Dest, Ricardo Pepi, Georgi Mihailovic, everybody who was a dual nat that someone else wanted, and he made sure they all played for the U.S. men's national team. So recruitment, I think, is something that maybe the Fire fans can look forward to, even if we haven't seen him actively on the transfer market in a couple of years.
And Peter makes a good point in the chat that the crew made the playoffs 4 out of 5 years while Anthony Precourt was actively shopping the team. I think that is kind of a funny thing, is that Berhalter was the coach for the end of the Precourt era. Then, of course, in 2019, all the change starts happening. The Save the Crew movement, Tim Bezbachenko becomes chief soccer officer, and all the success that follows from there. We've touched on it already a couple of times, Alex, this dual role that Gregg Berhalter is serving. This used to be super common in Major League Soccer. At one time, it was the norm in Major League Soccer. Peter Vermes is now the only one left standing, and that is going quite poorly these days in Kansas City. Before we talk about can Berhalter do it? I mean, the question I think broadly is this too much responsibility for anyone? Because in modern MLS, the concern is that it might be. So I don't think the concerns are about Berhalter per se, but this does seem like a lot to ask of someone in this current era of Major League Soccer, the way the league is growing and with the quality of talent that the league is trying to recruit.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually asked Frank Klopas this question in an interview back in July when Berhalter got fired. I kind of asked, do you think that the fire could go for a model where it's a combined role? And I kind of agree with what Frank said. He said, yes, it can be done. However, he needs help. He needs other people around him because managing that whole load all by himself is not going to be possible. I do think some names are going to stay around on the sporting side. I think you'll see some new names come in, both in terms of assistant coaches and front office staff, which might not be finalized until later in the offseason or
Mhm.
in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. But Frank Klopas is also going to be involved with that. He's going to be the vice president of football, which he's kind of sticking around in that role where he can kind of just be a Swiss Army knife, I guess, in terms of different parts of the club. But I do think that the idea is that Gregg will be overseeing the first team, the second team, and the academy. That's what the official statement is. At the same time, I do think that the people who are currently running those operations, Alex Bowler is general manager, Fire 2, Gary Lewis is the current academy technical director. Those guys will still probably, for the most part, continue what they're doing with the second team and the academy. Maybe Greg will get involved a little bit overseeing general direction in terms of play style, identity, that kind of thing, which is what he tried to do with U.S. soccer as well, instilling that same philosophy into the
Mhm.
U20s, into the U17s, into the U15s. So we'll see how that goes. And I think a lot is still up in the air because this is a new situation for the Fire. Not since 2015 or 2016 has the coach been in this position where they've also been the general manager.
Yeah, I would know you say that the one person I'm sure when you talk about the national team connections, maybe Sergio Orahel is going to play more for the Fire a bit because we got once again this week Sergio Orahel gets called up to a youth national team despite never actually playing for the first team. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch. Berhalter obviously knows the league well. He knows the player pool of the league pretty well. I mean, even as national team coach, it's something. Even though most of the squad, particularly by the end of his tenure, was guys who play in Europe, he's got a sense of what Major League Soccer is and like the intricacies of it. So I think he definitely checks the box of knowing the league, which I think was important here because I think that's probably been one of the biggest knocks on the Fire. If you look at Georg Heitz's time, it just took far, far too long for him to kind of get a grasp on the domestic transfer market and be able to properly rate talent if that ever happened. So yeah, I think that's certainly a big step forward. I agree with you that I think we're going to see a lot of people stay in place. It'll be interesting to see what role, if any, Sebastian Pelzer, the current technical director, has going forward. Frank Klopas being vice president of football, I don't know how vice president relates to director, which is Berhalter's title. I think I saw somebody just describe it, Klopas's new role as the vice president of vibes, which I think is fine. I mean, Frank's such a likable guy and a guy who cares about the club so much. So I think we all knew he was going to be around in some fashion. It is kind of funny though that this ends with Frank really not getting fired. Like that never really happens, despite the way the last couple seasons have gone. So yeah, I mean, we'll have the opportunity, I'm sure, and there's a game left. There will be other press conferences to talk to Frank Klopas about this. I'm interested to see what he has to say because to your point, how he answered that question in July, the writing has been on the wall here for a very long time that there was going to be big changes coming, and then when it was announced that Heights was stepping down, that kind of confirmed we were going to see this big overhaul. So yeah, something to watch in the coming days and weeks to see what kind of rollout we get here. Because of course today we get an announcement, but there's a game left. There's still more to come in terms of what we'll hear from Berhalter and what we'll hear from Klopas and others.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, there are going to be situations where maybe he wants to bring other people in to help him, where they're maybe at another club, and that might not be able to be resolved until the end of the season. So that's my expectation. Then there's also assistant coaches where Gregg had quite a few assistant coaches with the national team because they kept getting hired by MLS clubs repeatedly, Josh Wolf was the first one. Nico Estevez was at FC Dallas. All that. Luchi Gonzalez at San Jose. BJ Callahan, who just got hired by Nashville SC. So obviously not BJ because he just got hired by Nashville, but all those other guys have been fired from their jobs in the last couple of months. So I would keep an eye on some of those names when you're looking at who Gregg's assistants are going to be.
Yeah, the Josh Wolf one feels very, very obvious, having just been fired by Austin FC recently. Yeah, Luchi Gonzalez as well, another guy who had some success in Dallas, and then when he got back into MLS, I don't think it's anybody's fault if things don't go well with the San Jose Earthquakes, except ownership. That organization, man, if you think the Fire's in a bad spot, like we've talked about it, but my God, these San Jose Earthquakes and the mess that they are. So what is this? Let's talk about what does this mean for the Fire. Berhalter, especially when he started with the U.S. men's national team, talked a lot about. I mean, the funny quote phrase is disorganizing the opponent with the ball. He's a guy who wants his team to have the ball. Thinking about the Fire, the core of the Fire squad, and who we, assume will still be around next year. Is there any particular player or two you feel like this could be really good for, whose career might really be helped by having Berhalter as their coach?
Absolutely. There's number one, Kellen Aosta. He played the best soccer of his career under Gregg Berhalter between 2021 and 2022. He kind of had some ups and downs when he was a younger player, and he was even out of the national team for a while. 2021, between coming into that March international camp and the World Cup in Qatar 2022, his minutes with the national team, that's the best version of Kellen Aosta that anybody's ever seen. So I think that he's going to be important in this. I also think Brian Gutierrez is going to develop a lot more under this new head coach. I think he has some similarities to Gio Reyna, and also Gio Reyna has played his best soccer under Gregg Berhalter, regardless of what their off-the-field relationship was. Gio was at his best for the national team, and I think stylistically, Guti and Gio have some similarities that might translate into Guti playing well as a number 10 or even as an inverted winger for Gregg Berhalter's system.
Yeah, I do wonder if this kind of feels like the time if Berhalter wants to play that 4-3-3. We've been talking about it for a while. What is Brian Gutierrez, and what does he have to do to take that next step? Maybe this is a chance, maybe he becomes more of an out-and-out winger. Maybe this is the opportunity for him to be a number 8 type, like a more advanced number 8 midfield type. And of course, that depends on who else is in the midfield. You assume Aosta is one of those people. The one concern I think that I might have, and I'd agree with your Aosta and Guti takes there. Certainly, I think it's good for those two guys. The biggest question, of course, is that the criticism of Berhalter's teams often was that they haven't been particularly good at creating chances for strikers. The U.S. men's national team has had this problem off and on. The Columbus teams he coached didn't really rely on a target center forward. I mean, Jossie Zardes was playing mostly as just a pressing forward in those teams. So, and of course, the biggest issue with the Fire this year, one of the big issues on the field, was that they can't get the ball to Yugo Kyer. So I wonder what your thoughts are on concerns that this might not necessarily be the best thing for solving the Kuiper's lack of service problem. Or is that simply about players and the Fire just need to get some better people around him?
No, I entirely agree with you that Yugo Kyer is not the biggest winner of this head coach. Who was Gregg's favorite striker when he was the national team coach before Balogun? Jesus Ferreira, not a striker even. He was Berhalter's favorite striker until they got Balogun, and Jesus Ferreira is not even really a striker. He's a number 10. So I think that tells you a lot. He's going to have to adjust his system to revolve more around getting service to the number 9. But if you look at 2021, 2022, strikers did not exactly eat under Gregg Berhalter. I mean,
No.
Ricardo Pepi led goal scoring in World Cup qualifying for a bit with his 3 goals. Josh Sargent has not scored for the national team since 2019. Haji Wright, I mean, he's not very good, but his only goal of note was accidental. Jossie Zardes, all these strikers failed for the national team. And it's not entirely their fault. It just wasn't a system that revolved around the number 9. So there will have to be an adjustment there. But Yugo Kyrper's also probably better than most of those guys. So
So yeah,
he should be able to deliver.
we'll have to see. Speaking of potential new teammates, we will get to that after a quick word from our sponsors. CHGO Fire is, of course, as always, brought to you by our friends over at Coors Light. Between work, social media, the choices life throws our way, all the stresses of this time of year, we're worked up a lot. It feels like times are very stressful. There's lots of opportunities to choose to chill, and Coors Light celebrates rising above and choosing that chill mindset. And when you embrace a chill mindset, that is the perfect time to reach for a Coors Light. Coors Light is mountain cold refreshment. I'm sure there's a lot of Fire fans feeling a bit more chill today now that the Berhalter news has come through, or maybe you're not so thrilled about it and you need to choose a chill mindset. And when you're in that mindset, that is where Coors Light comes in. The mountains turn blue on the bottles and cans when they are as cold as the Colorado Rockies. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged for a smoother finish. When you embrace a chill mindset, it's a good time to choose chill and crack open a Coors Light, crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. Make the most out of the times you choose to chill and choose Coors Light. Get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/CHGO Soccer. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. CHGO Fire is also brought to you by Shady Rays. Get ready for the rest of your outdoor adventures this late summer, I suppose that we are still in October, and into fall with quality shades built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered with premium polarized shades that don't break the bank. Shady Rays are an independent company offering a world-class product and have been rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people thanks to their durable frames and crystal clear optics, which make them the perfect choice for all of your outdoor adventures. They have hundreds of options, styles, colors, shapes to choose from. You are bound to find the perfect pair to match your style. I'm a huge fan of Shady Rays, especially their lost or broken guarantee. If your shades take a hit, no need to worry. You can get a brand new pair shipped to you. I got a huge discount on a pair I had bought 2 years ago, and I was able to get a new pair for less than $20. They were at my door within a week. Their customer service is excellent as well. Maybe you just don't like your shades, though. And if that's the case, you can exchange them for a new pair, return them worry-free within 30 days. There is no risk when you shop. Their team always has your back with their personal and fast support. Exclusively for CHGO listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the season. Head to shadyrays.com and use code CHGO for 35% off polarized sunglasses. Try for yourself the shades rated 5 stars by over 300,000 people. This is a good time if we take a quick look at the chat we have going on here. See if there's anything going on on a competitive team. Both Gutman and Marin Holly Selassie, this commenter Jason is referring to, should be coming off the bench. I think that's fair. The tough thing with Gutman is he's just never really been healthy for long enough for us to know exactly what he's going to offer long term. He feels like a starter on this team. I guess before we move on, Alex, anybody else besides him? And we talked about Guti, we talked about Aosta. What do you think this means for a guy like Gaston Higuain, a guy who's such a possession player, but has kind of been in this weird contract situation? Do you think a coach like Berhalter is going to want a guy like him around, or is the juice still not worth the squeeze when it comes to what he's making?
I mean, he has a year left. I don't know if he would leave his contract right now. If he were go back to Argentina, it would be a significantly smaller payday. He was very much a guy that Garrick Heights was a huge fan of. One of Heights' top guys. So with Heights not making those decisions anymore, I'm not sure what kind of an impact that has. I'm just not sure he's someone you're able to move at this point overseas.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I
without him taking a big pay cut, which he could, and maybe it comes down to Berhalter saying you're not going to play. But then again, he had his second best season for the Fire this year. I think he actually was one of the bright spots this year, unpopular opinion, hot take. So I don't know. I don't think he should be a starter next season regardless.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So let's speculate. Let's have some fun. The Fire, we expect a lot of change. In addition to the free agents, we expect a lot of roster turnover this year. There's a lot of opportunity to do so. So let's think about some guys the Fire could target. The first group, and this is not a particularly inspiring group I'm thinking of, is free agents, like guys who are fully out of contract, not with pending options, because so many of those pending option guys aren't going anywhere, who are former or current USMNT players. That list has a couple veterans on it. You've got guys like Tim Parker, who's, the St. Louis move hasn't really gone to plan there, and then he got flipped to New England. So that's a weird situation, and I don't think anybody wants to be in New England these days. Alejandro Bedoya, if you want another Kellen Aosta mold scrapper in your team who's just a CONCACAF veteran, is out of contract. Aaron Long, who I did not rate as a U.S. men's national team center back, but I think would definitely be an upgrade on some of the center backs in the current Fire squad. And then the last guy in this group is Jonathan Lewis, currently at the Colorado Rapids, where he's been in and out a bit. But that guy, I don't know. I'll take Chris Mueller or Yorios Koutsias on the wing over him. And any of those names doing anything for you?
Aaron Long, yes. I think you need to have other guys. Like, he can't be your top center back, but as a serviceable second or third center back in MLS, I think that's fine. The most important thing here we have to remember, and this has the same thing going forward, we've been viewing all these players from a U.S. men's national team lens for the last 6 years. Luca De La Torre is the best example of this. I know we're not there yet, but I do not rate Luca De La Torre as a U.S. men's national team player at all. I do not think he should be even close to getting call-ups at this point. But if we're reevaluating it to what the Chicago Fire or an MLS team that wants to compete wants, completely different conversation. So in Aaron Long, for example, I think in MLS at this point in his career, he's kind of getting older, but he'd probably be good to be a Sahlquist. I think we haven't seen the best of him either. His injuries have made this a difficult season for him. So if you told me the center back pairing would be a guy like Sahlquist and a Long, it's fine with me.
So if we get in this next group I've got, these are other guys, these are MLS guys, who I think you could be available in our Berhalter. These are all Berhalter guys, or guys that Berhalter called up into the national team. Jeremy Ebobisse wouldn't be a starter, but he, like everybody, seems to want out of San Jose very badly. And the Fire's striker depth right now, Tom Barlow hasn't exactly been it. I think it is fair to say. DeAndre Yedlin, and again, if you want veteran CONCACAF scrappy guys, also the Fire could use some right back upgrades, at least over, I would take DeAndre Yedlin over Arnaud Souquet right now. Then there are the Seattle guys, because things in Seattle kind of seem to be at an end to this cycle, so to speak. The brothers Roldan and Jordan Morris are all guys that, Christian especially was always a good locker room guy that Berhalter liked a lot. Jordan Morris, again, guy who divided lots of national team opinion, but is a solid MLS player. Jackson Ewell is potentially out of contract in San Jose. So there's another guy who Berhalter at one point at least liked a lot and is probably looking for an escape route. Another guy I've got here, right back option, Shaq Moore, which I actually think might be a better idea than Yedlin, though I'm not sure Nashville would want to let him go. And anybody else domestically, anybody else in MLS who you'd put in this category of potentially interesting people?
There's one who never played for the senior national team, but I would maybe throw in there is Caden Clark from CF Montreal. He was supposed to be called up to the 2021 Gold Cup, but at the very, very last minute, like 11th hour, his appendix burst and he couldn't go, and his career kind of fell off for a bit there. But he's had a renaissance at Montreal this season, scored against the Fire a couple of weeks ago at Stade Saputo, and I think he'd be an interesting player, just personally, who Berhalter is definitely familiar with from his breakout seasons in the Red Bulls. There are a few guys not exactly in MLS, but maybe Alejandro Zendejas is somewhere in this conversation as a TAM player. He's someone who Berhalter was involved in recruiting to play for the U.S. He was a dual national with Mexico, and I think he'd be a very, very good winger in MLS. And then we're just doing MLS right now, right? Not Europe.
Yeah,
I think Shaq Moore, I think, in terms of a trade, seems like someone that would be more likely, just because Berhalter loves Shaq Moore for the national team. He called him up to the World Cup and Copa America, and he was one of the only players that, other than the main core guys, who had that treatment. So Yeah.
Briefly looking at a comment, any Fire 2 players that have the potential to start or come off the bench for the first team? Start, no. Come off the bench. I mean, I think there's no way the successful Fire 2 players can play any less than they currently play for the first team. I would expect under Berhalter, I would expect, again, like for example, we won't dwell on this, but I would expect from this season, there's no way David Pareba would make it through a season playing this well without getting a single minute for the Fire first team. I'll put it that way. Like
Yeah.
Berhalter is somebody who I don't think he's going to feel as tied to, oh, we're playing player X money, so we've got to play them. I mean, we saw Amari Glasgow get those 4 call-ups. We saw Diego Konix get a few call-ups and then not play. So that was weird. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of too soon to know, but hey, all the best to the Fire 2 guys. They got a playoff game coming up, and yeah, they've got a chance to show what they're made of. And yeah, I hope there's more opportunity for them, but also I hope the Fire are better next year, and thus there is less thought of, hey, let's give the kids a shot because this is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I've made this opinion very clear in the last couple of weeks that even though Fire 2 have been very, very successful this season, David Pareba won the Golden Boot, Amari Glasgow has been one of the best players in the league. Those are not necessarily guys whose skill set translates to MLS. So I wouldn't expect those guys to automatically get first team deals, even though I hope both of them do have some first team involvement because I do really like both of them. I think what's more notable and impressive to me is the 16-year-olds like Christopher Cupps and Vitaly Hliut, who are playing roles at such a young age. Patrick Lose as well, a goalkeeper 07. Those 3 guys, I think maybe long-term as potential homegrowns, someone to keep an eye on. And then Robert Turdine, who's going to play for Fire 2 next season, 14-year-old top prospect in the academy. So I think maybe those guys are the ones I'm more interested in from a first-team lens when you're looking at Fire 2, just because I think a lot of the guys who are excelling in MLS Next Pro aren't necessarily players who will translate into MLS.
Yeah, it's kind of like AAA baseball. Like just because you're like AAA isn't really where often you see the top prospects. It's the AA teams. It's the younger guys. It's kind of the kids who are the ones to watch. Turdine, for those who aren't familiar, is rated as the number 2 player in his year behind Kevin Sullivan, who, of course, if you're familiar with MLS, you are well aware of his talents and future Manchester City destination. So there is that, of course. So, and Patrick Loss looks like a good goalkeeper, but he needs to grow 4 or 5 inches if he's going to get looks in MLS. Okay, before we get out of here, European guys who need rescuing. This is a category I think MLS teams in general don't use enough, and I think they should be doing a lot more of. You already mentioned Luca De La Torre. I think that would be a slam dunk of an idea. He is not playing at Celta Vigo in Spain right now. They got a new coach this season who flatly said, you're not part of this. And so Luke is hanging out, eating octopus by the water somewhere, I assume, a lot, and not playing very much soccer. So as a number 8 TAM/DP level guy, that seems obvious. I think him and Aosta combo in midfield could be interesting. Goalkeepers, Mauricio Pochettino, new U.S. men's national team coach, said this week that right now a lot of the U.S. men's national team goalkeepers aren't playing, and he said that's going to be a problem going forward. If you're not playing, you are not going to get called in. Matt Turner and Ethan Horvath are both currently not playing soccer. Horvath partially because he has not been good and his team is very bad. Matt Turner, a little more complicated the situation. And then the last one I have is Christopher Lund, left back, who Berhalter clearly likes as a locker room guy and who seems to be a really nice dude. He's just stuck in Serie B right now with Palermo, and if he's going to have a national team future, probably needs to get out of there. I know you agree with me on the Luca De La Torre point. Anybody else you feel like let's do a reclamation project on their career that hasn't gone so well in Europe?
I mean, the Colorado Rapids took all of my answers. They signed Georgi Mihailovic, they signed Sam Vines, they signed Reggie Cannon, and they signed Zach Steffen.
Cole Bassett coming back too there.
Cole Bassett as well. If you want,
they're like the only team that's done this right.
Maybe a Haji Wright. I mean, I don't know. He's had a kind of slow start to the season in the championship. I don't know if he can get any higher than that ceiling. I mean, Gianluca Buzio, maybe if he can't nail down every week starter for Venezia in Serie
Or
A.
if they get
And then
relegated again.
Brian Reynolds is another right back I would keep an eye
Reynolds
on.
is a good shout. I like that shout. He's one of the, we've seen this. I've talked about this with DC United and like guys who went to Belgium, and some of them work and some of them don't. And Reynolds is a talented athlete, certainly, but I think could certainly make an MLS impact.
And
then, of
Maximilian
course,
Dietz as well. Maximilian Dietz.
center back, great
in the Zweite Bundesliga. He was in the Olympic team.
So yeah, that's another good shout as well. And then the last one, this is the fun one. This is the ridiculous, stupid one, but we have to at least touch on it. Weston McKennie, who multiple MLS teams, FC Cincinnati included, tried to sign this summer, who every summer seems to be out of the project at Juventus, but is now playing. We saw Matt Doyle of MLSsoccer.com throw out a comment today that he would not be surprised if the Fire just put a huge bag of money on a plane to Juventus and asked for him. People have, said for a while that this would be a fun idea. I have no idea if this could even happen, but like it would be fun as hell if it did.
Yeah, I mean, look, let's just say that in the past there have been MLS teams that have made offers to key U.S. men's national team players, LA Galaxy for Serginho Dest in 2023 being one of them, rejected because a lot of these players don't want to abandon their European careers. They don't want to come back to MLS. They don't want to do what Dempsey and Altidore and Bradley did. However, Weston McKennie's not necessarily one of those guys. Soccer has not been his life since he was 3 years old. Right. I think he'd do what makes the most sense for him personally. And from what I know about him, he's not the kind of guy who's just going to go to Miami or LA. Like Chicago might be a possibility for Weston McKennie. Other ridiculously ambitious European guy I would throw in there is Tim Weah, because if he's not playing before the World Cup in 2026, he's going to need to be getting minutes. And, he's been struggling at Juventus to get regular minutes, and he's had some injuries recently. And, well, if you look at it this way, it's pretty likely that if it weren't for Tim Weah, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about Gregg Berhalter as the Chicago Fire's head coach right now.
How funny would that be is if Tim Weah ended up with the Fire, although I'm sure the New York clubs, NYCFC in particular, would have something to say about that if he ever came back. The other one, of course, who has been offered recently is Josh Sargent, who FC Cincinnati bid like $22 million for this past year. Sargent's
I wouldn't rule that out in MLS, but I think since he has his rights, so that would make things.
Yeah, since he would have his rights, St. Louis obviously would be interested. Sargent's one that's interesting to watch because, I mean, Norwich are stuck in championship purgatory. They're just kind of stuck there forever. And so Sargent can either be a god in East Anglia in England, which, doesn't sound like the worst career to have, or we'll have to see what he wants to do unless he gets, unless some relegation threatened Premier League team tries to pick him off because Norwich aren't going anywhere. There's going to be a lot more to talk about with this. Again, at some point, we will have a Gregg Berhalter introductory press conference, and that will produce lots of fun
later this week.
News. So look for that later this week. There will be lots of things to discuss because of that. We have a podcast scheduled for next week that will likely be dealing with that. We will hear from Frank Klopas at some point. The Fire still have a game to play, even though it's against Nashville and means absolutely nothing because both teams have been eliminated from the playoffs. Might be a farewell for guys like Fabian Herbers, Wyatt Omsberg, Spencer Ritchie, all out of contract. I hope Spencer gets that start. No offense to Chris Brady, because again, if it is Spencer's last match, that'd be a nice way to send him out. I assume we'll see Fabi start and play the whole 90 in that game as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for all of that. Keep an eye out with what Alex and the guys over at Men in Red are up to. Could be another fun week ahead, despite the on-field stuff of Chicago Fire discussion. Alex, thanks so much for being here. Always appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you for having me on once again. And I hope everyone will stay tuned because there will be more updates in the coming weeks and months. So I will keep you all posted on that.
Happy almost off season, everybody. This has been a CHGO emergency podcast presented by Indeed. I am Alex Campbell, and I'll see you next time on CHGO Fire.
We all silly like the mayor.